So that song, King of Kings, I love that song because it kind of walks through the whole picture, doesn't it? If you listen to all those words, it walks through, starting at the beginning, all the way to the end when Jesus burst forth from the tomb, and then it talks about and talking about the church, and it shall not kneel, shall not faint. Right, that the church will persevere. Why? Because the church is strong on its own? No, because of the power of Jesus Christ, the power of the resurrection. And we've been spending the last few weeks kind of moving from that beginning all the way up. We started all the way in Genesis and how vital it is to understand what Genesis is trying to do. It sets the problem, if you will, right? That we were created to be good and to bring good into the world. That's what God desired for us. He created us in his image, male, female. He created us the way that he desired, that we were created to be in a relationship with him. But the story of Adam and Eve is the story of all of us. And all of us chose ultimately to take control and to strive to be God. What did the serpent said, did God really say? He immediately gets you questioning. And then he says, you will not surely die, right? But you will be like God. And we've all decided to try to take control of our own life. And, sometimes that can go okay for a while, but eventually you crash and burn because we were created to be in a relationship with God where it is God and then us, right? And if you get the order wrong, things unravel quickly. And so then as you move past Genesis and through the rest of Genesis, you see how things started unraveling very quickly. That humanity started moving away from God. And that brings you to Noah, where wickedness prevailed and humanity was basically destroying itself because of its wickedness. So God, in his mercy, decided, I'm going to stop humanity from inflicting all of this evil on themselves, and we're going to start over. And God does that. And then it continues, and people continue to struggle. And so God continues to reach out in different ways. And so then he speaks to Abraham, and he uses Abraham to begin a group of people, just a wandering, nomadic group of people. And he calls them to be his people, not just to reward them, not just to make them special, but so that they would share the message of God with the rest of the world. And so they do that sometimes and sometimes not. They end up in Egypt and be enslaved in Egypt. And so God sends Moses to bring them out of Egypt in miraculous ways. And then God gives them the law. And so we have the Passover, we have all of those ancient Jewish traditions, right, that are reminding them of what God has done for them. But those traditions and the Ten Commandments and those laws, they're not just for the Jewish people. They are for all of us. The people are supposed to share that with the rest of the world. And that leads eventually, because that doesn't work as well as it should have, because, again, people are people. And the moment that the nation of Israel and the individuals and the leadership of Israel began to put themselves above God, you started seeing crumbling. And that leads to where we talked about last week, all of those prophecies that were written a few hundred years before began to be fulfilled as Jesus enters in to Jerusalem on that final time, that Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry. As he returns to Jerusalem knowing what is to come, knowing what he's going to have to face. But God is going to reveal himself in a way no one expected. He is entering into this mess. Right? And he's not relying on a group of people anymore. He's going to redeem himself. And then he calls his people to rally behind, and he calls the church out to share this message with just a small group of people? No, with the rest of the world. Because God's desire is to see goodness in the world. That's why he created the world. It was not to see evil, But people can choose to do evil. Everyone has the capacity to do good or to do evil. He created us to do good. Unfortunately, many times we choose not to. And so we get to this place where Jesus finds himself on a cross. Can you imagine his disciples? This is not what they expected. They didn't anticipate this turn. See, they thought that they believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They believed that he was the Son of God, the one that God was going to use to restore the people to their rightful place. But that didn't include death. See, there had been, we know of at least 10 other people who have made the history books, not the Bible, but the history books. We know of 10 others who claimed to be messiahs. Guess where all of them are? They're rotting. Well, they've already rotted. It's 2,000 years ago. Right? But there were those. This wasn't an uncommon thing. The people were looking for a Messiah. And they all realized whenever that Messiah that they thought ended up in the ground, they realized, well, we were wrong. Right? That's how it worked. And so you can imagine the disciples as they see Jesus be put up on that cross, starting to think, were we wrong the whole time? We must have been, because this is it. That's why they weren't there, because they realized, what do you do after you get rid of the leader? You get the next in line. You make sure they're wiped out too. That's how you stop rebellions. That's how you stop that kind of stuff. They thought they were next. But something changed. And what changed was the resurrection. We're going to talk about the resurrection today. You know, the resurrection is vital to understand. And as I was preparing for today, I've been very honest with us as a congregation that I believe there's some pretty intense things going on in the world. And so as you're preparing to share a message that you share kind of every week, and we shouldn't try to, you don't have to add a whole lot to the story. It's a powerful story, right? So you don't have to manipulate that or anything. It's a powerful enough story on its own. But we're always we always have to understand that our perspective, our worldview, is going to impact the way that we see things, right? And so as I was preparing for the resurrection, one thing that I couldn't move away from is that I am seeing things from a perspective that we are in open spiritual warfare in the world around us. Not subtle, not kind of hidden in the shadows, that it is wide open to see. And I know that not everyone is there, right? But that's where I am, and so I start thinking about that in those terms, and I want you to know I take seriously what I say, and I say what I truly believe, but I don't always know if that's completely right or not. I agonize over that because I believe that I will be held accountable by God for what I say. And if I mislead, then I will be held accountable for that. And so I struggle, and I pray, Lord, just shut my mouth if I'm starting to lead in a wrong direction, right? But we are entering into a different time, and I've listened to other pastors, and I've listened to try to convince me that we're not experiencing kind of an existential spiritual battle going on out there, and I've heard some examples. And I've heard some arguments. They kind of fall short. And this week, whenever you have a major sportswear brand who is now hired a model who is a biological male to model their sports bras and yoga pants, you're going to have to come up with a really good argument to convince me that something hasn't changed in our culture. Something's changed, right? There are some who believe it's good, that this is the way that we should be going. I do not. I believe we're seeing what happens when a society turns fully away from God and unknowingly starts to embrace the ancient pagan gods that are not godly. Right? That is where we are. And it's a weird place to be because you also are going through normal life and we should be enjoying normal life. But like this week, a few things, and I don't know if it's just because I'm old and getting cranky, right? Am I already there? Maybe so. Maybe I'm already like Clint Eastwood and Gran Torino, right? If you haven't seen that, he just shoots at people, right? You got close. Maybe that's where I am. I don't know. But I see all these things on the news, and this morning the news, they're wearing bunny ears and they're showing about how people dropped eggs from helicopters and all this stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to see another Easter bunny. It has nothing to do with the resurrection. And by the way, still, some of my greatest memories are spending time with family, hunting Easter eggs, stuff like that. That's okay, but you better understand what time it is, and we better stop focusing on the bunny that randomly poops out eggs and hides them somehow. I don't know the connection. I have never figured out the connection between the Easter bunny and Easter eggs, but it's there, and we embrace it as a society, and I don't understand it. And this year, I'm done with the bunny. It's time to go back to what we did to bunnies when I was in high school, right? And that was, we were in the back of a truck with shotguns, right? Very safe, right? But I'm like, what is happening? And then yesterday we're in the Domain, spending time and just enjoying. And we went to this weird place. It's the ice cream museum. It's the strangest place I've ever been. I don't understand it. I'm clearly too old to go to the ice cream. Way too much pink there. It's sensory overload. People are taking selfies everywhere you look. And you're like, this is representative exactly of our society. And a lot of people are having a lot of fun. And they're enjoying it, and good for them. Great. And I had fun too being with my family. But there's part of me that I'm like, do y'all not know that our society is crumbling? Like, probably because of this ice cream museum. Right? I'm like, what is actually happening? And I start thinking about this. I'm like, oh my gosh. I feel like, and this is a horrible analogy, I feel like the Battle of the Bulge. If you read the Battle of the Bulge, the American soldiers were there, and they literally were just getting shelled, and they got into these little foxholes, and they just hung out with each other, and they'd peek up over the edge, and then they'd get shot at, and then they go back down, and then it'd start to calm down, and then all of a sudden they'd get shelled again. Guess what? They knew they were in a war. They didn't want to be there, but they knew they were there, and they knew they were going to have to find their way out sometimes. I feel like I'm in that place, and every once in a while I peek up over the edge, and I see this couple wearing a sweater vest and a sundress just walking through the forest, and I'm like, don't you know there's bullets and bombs all around you? Wake up! Wake up! It is a weird time to be alive, and we need to be able to go out and celebrate. We need to be able to go out and have joy, but we better, as the church, if you are going to be part of the church, if you're going to call yourself a Christian, you better engage in the war that's out there. I don't know how it ends up completely. I know ultimately how it ends up. I don't know if this means the demise of our American culture. It feels that way. I don't know exactly what this means. But I do know that when spiritual battles start to rage, those who call themselves Christians are in the crosshairs. And as a pastor, I believe one of my roles is to prepare us for what may come. And the reality is I promise in seminary I did not learn about spiritual battles and how to fight them. Right? And in many ways, fighting a spiritual battle isn't always an outward thing. It's what's going on in here with you. And it has to start with a very powerful place. Your foundation has to be rock solid. And that foundation is the power of the resurrection. The reason that I know that ultimately this spiritual battle will be won by Christ is because he overcame sin and death. He came out of that grave. That is the only hope I have in the big picture. And so I started thinking about the resurrection. And I started thinking about how we got to a place where Easter eggs and bunnies are, and this was in 2010. We are much dumber than we were in 2010. In 2010, only 42% of Americans equated Easter with the resurrection. That was in 2010. There has been a spiritual attack on the resurrection for years. Many probably felt it in different ways. But for you, if you're a Christian, if you truly believe that, you're like, no, I believe it. But it has been slowly infiltrating society, where our society now sees an Easter bunny, not an empty tomb. I started thinking about this. How did this work? How did it manipulate the truth? There's two key ways, I believe, that we see the resurrection being attacked in this spiritual battle. I think this is important to talk about because if things go the direction that they are headed, you better know what you believe, because it's going to be tested. And in fact, you're going to be tempted, encouraged, coerced, and then maybe forced to not believe. So you better know what your true beliefs are on what you will give and what you won't. And I believe the resurrection is something that you should hold on to no matter what, even at the point of death. Why? Because it's a good story that makes you feel good? No, because it's real and it happened. That's why. So the way that the resurrection has been attacked, a couple different ways. The first is to start questioning whether the resurrection was actually literal or not. Did it really happen? Did Jesus physically get up and go out of the grave? Did that really happen? Now, it's interesting. For the first few thousand years of the church, that was never a problem. Yeah, that happened. Then we started getting smart in the mid-19th century, mid-1800s. And we started having scientific breakthroughs, which, by the way, came because people of faith were actually exploring the world around them. But then we kept moving, and people decided, wait, if we can find penicillin, then maybe we don't need God. What's that initial separation started it back in Genesis? Is no, you don't need God. You can do it yourself. And so science started changing. We started having the Industrial Revolution, all of these things. Look at what we're doing. We don't need everyone out there farming. We have now starting to get machines that can do that. Look, we are able to take care of ourselves. We are smart. We have figured all of this out. And yeah, now that we're so smart, let's look back at that dusty old book. It claims to say that this guy rose from the dead. We now know science. We know that doesn't happen. We kind of knew it before, but now we really know because we're smart and we're educated. And so all of a sudden there starts to be questioning. Well, maybe this wasn't actual literal. And now there's justification for it. And you will hear this preached. You'll hear this taught in seminaries, that the resurrection is really just a metaphor. It didn't really happen, but it's still really important. And we believe it. Don't do it, but you can Google. Google, can you be a Christian without believing in the resurrection? And if you want to do that, there are many things that will affirm that. They are very wrong. This is from an article that I believe that's the actual title, is Can You Be a Christian Without Believing in the Resurrection? And this was, I believe this, it was a Catholic priest and then a guy who was nearly a Catholic priest, but then he got smart, right? And decided, but so now he's a non-practicing Catholic teaching at a seminary somewhere. Okay, so this is a quote that he had. He said, "The miracle of the bodily resurrection is something I rejected without moving away from its basic idea. What I mean is that we can reach the lowest point of our lives of going deep into a place that feels like death and then find our way out again. That's the story the resurrection now tells me. And at Easter, this is expressed in community and at its best through the compassion of others." It says there is only one story to be told if a single man who dies and then rises. But if we think about the metaphor of the resurrection, that allows us to return to the story year after year and find new meaning in it. I have no idea what any of that practically means. The thing that is in here that's interesting. So the reason that he gets to this point is because he can't let himself put aside his scientific mind and full understanding. And he doesn't like the fact that there's a lot of people who don't come to Christianity. Why? Because they can't accept that Jesus literally died and rose again. And you know what? I don't like that either. But I'm not going to decide, well, I don't really like that. It's causing some people to stumble, so I'll just change it. But think about the practical aspect of what he's saying. He talks about the resurrection. There's some things in there that I agree with, that when we feel like we're going through death and that resurrection can give us hope. Yes, all that's true. But what does it says? And at Easter, this is expressed where? In the power of the resurrection? No. He says it's expressed in community and at its best through the compassion of others. I'm sorry, if you are relying on your hope, and if you're relying on your joy, on finding new life in community or the compassion of others, you are in trouble. Your community, no matter how good it is, whether it's your church community, whether it's your faith community, whether it's your regular community, is filled with a bunch of sinners, and it is going to fail you. The compassion of others is completely reliant on them and on whether they want to give compassion or whether they know to give compassion or not. If you want to rely on that for finding hope and finding joy and finding truth in the resurrection, good luck. You're going to be miserable, and you're either going to be just kind of a casual Christian who doesn't really apply it to your life at all, or you're just going to walk away completely. That is where it will lead. The resurrection literally happened. And it's important to understand that. I know that's a bold claim. I know that that's a hard claim for us to understand. But I'm going to read just a few verses from 1 Corinthians 15, because you say, well, why not? Why can't we take more of a metaphorical look? There are some things in Scripture that we do that with, right? Why does the resurrection actually have to have literally happened? Well, Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15, he's actually going to recite a creed that was going on before he became a Christian. So this creed is circulating within just a few years within the Christian church, which historically speaking is huge as validity to what it's claiming. So 1 Corinthians 15, It says, now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. Now listen to what he says. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and he appeared to Cephas and to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to lepers. Then he, where did that come from? Then he appeared to James, then to all apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me. He did appear to lepers, by the way. But and last of all, he appeared to me also as one abnormally born. For I am the least of the apostles and do not deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. By the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. Now I work harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me, whether then it is I or they. This is what we preach, and this is what you believe. What was the first thing of importance? That Christ died, that he rose again on the third day. Not metaphorically. Okay? And it is vital to understand. You may think, well, what's the difference? When you're in the spiritual battle, you're going to let go of the metaphorical crap. I promise you. You're going to hold on to what is real and what is true. And if you think the resurrection is a metaphor, I promise you, you will jettison that in the days to come. Because it won't be worth it. You'll want to avoid the stigma. You'll want to avoid whatever the persecution looks like. Paul knew the resurrection had happened. And man, we have tried to confuse people with this. And I just want to, people say you can't prove it. Okay, I understand that. But there's a whole lot of legitimate evidence that points to the literal resurrection of Christ as the only thing that makes sense. Right? And you can spend, there's a great, pretty short book called Body of Proof that goes through. And it's so simple. And I just want to ask you, if you're struggling with this, ask yourself, why are we here today? Because, listen, those 12 guys, those first followers, they already had a religion that they were following. They never were intending to start a new one, right? The Messiah was just the continuation of the Jewish faith. They weren't going to start it. And so if they were going to start another one, they came up with the worst story ever, right? Because they rooted it in actual history. Most faith and religions are not rooted in actual tangible history. They're rooted in myth, right? This is rooted, you can find out, did a guy named Jesus live? Yes, he did. Did a guy named Jesus die? Yes, he did, right? It's tangible. It's there. Also, why would you start off by saying, hey, our Savior, the guy who's going to redeem us, he died on a cross, right? And then why would you say he rose again? Because guess what? That sounds crazy today. It sounded crazy then too. They didn't believe that. And then why would you have the women as the first people to see it? They weren't even allowed to be witnesses. In fact, one of the things we see in Roman literature is that they criticized and they said, this isn't true because it came from women, right? They used that as an attack. So why, if you're starting a new faith, why would you start off with the weakest examples possible? Why would people who were scared to death and thought they were going to die all of a sudden decide, you know what? I'm going to start saying someone came back to life, and that's going to lead to me being killed. You know, I would think, and history says that Peter was crucified upside down. I would think as you're starting to be nailed to that cross and turned upside down, you maybe say, hey, just kidding, guys. I know where the body is. No, the reason he did it is because he saw the risen Lord. He didn't see a spirit. He didn't have a good goosebumpy feeling. And said, oh, gee, that was a cold spot back there. My hair on my neck raised up. It must have been Jesus. No, he saw him. He touched him. He ate with him. Why would a guy named Paul and Saul go and spend time persecuting the church, trying to stomp it out, and then all of a sudden switch just like that to his detriment? Right? Today, it can pay to be a popular preacher. It didn't pay Paul to be a popular preacher. He suffered mightily. Why did he do that? Because someone came and preached a good message to him? No, because he saw the risen Lord. And he knew it was true. And he had to change. Do not allow this society to push you away from the reality of the resurrection. And the next thing, just very, very quickly, the next thing that the spiritual battle is how it's trying to attack the resurrection is it's doing all it can to basically minimize the severity of all sinfulness. And I've thought about this quite a bit. If you can convince people that there really is no sin, then they will never be able to experience the power of the resurrection. So we've, in the name of making people feel good and much of this has been done with good intentions, but it is being influenced by things that want to push us away from God. We've started telling children and people, no, you just need to be you. No, you need to be the person God created you to be. How many times have you said or heard, you know what, you're perfect just the way you are? No, you're not. None of us are. You are not perfect just the way you are. I'm sorry. And if that makes you feel bad, I'm sorry, but you know what? I have an answer. You're not perfect just the way you are, but you know what? Christ is, and he can make you perfect through the power of the resurrection. But in order to experience that, in order for your self-esteem to be built up, in order for your mental health to be built up, you better acknowledge you're sinful. I'm sinful. We're all sinful, and we can't fix it on our own because we have decided to try to play God and not God himself. And we have to come to that place where we know Jesus walked out of that tomb, and now I can live in the resurrection power that tells me, yes, I was a sinner. Yes, I have messed up. But now you are washed whiter than snow, and you are new, and you are raised to live a new life. And you don't have to live in fear of all the garbage going on in the world because you know that God is conquering all of it. Because he walked out of that tomb. It is vital for us to understand this. And it's uncomfortable, but all of us in here have messed up. But we live in a society that's trying to convince us that nothing is sinful. Literally nothing. You go down the rabbit holes on this stuff. Nothing is sinful. Why is that? Because Satan doesn't want you to experience the power of the resurrection. That's good. I don't know what the future holds. I am not hopeful in our society fixing this. We're looking in lots of different areas. If you think a political party that has a confused octogenarian leading it will save you, no. If you think a political party that is being led by kind of a narcissistic, weird, tanned guy is going to save you, you're going to be sorely mistaken. And I don't care what you believe about any of that. That is not where our hope is found. The only way that our society is going to start crawling back to some level of sanity is through the power of the resurrection. That's it. And we can engage in all that other stuff, and I think we should. But the answer is found in the power of the resurrection. And you need to prepare yourself. Acknowledge your sin. Allow him to wash you whiter than snow. Accept that he has paid that debt. So then you can begin engaging the spiritual battle around you. And that you will never set aside what is true. That you will hold on to it no matter what happens around us. Let's go to him in prayer.